Close your eyes for a moment and listen. Can you hear it? The gentle rhythm of horseshoes on cobblestone. The distant clang of a tram bell echoing between narrow stone buildings. Linen curtains flapping in the breeze from windows cracked open to let the morning sun in. The scent of burnt bread drifting out of brick ovens on quiet corners. Sarajevo breathed like a city caught between centuries Ottoman domes, still sleeping beside Austrian clock towers, and the Miljaska River shimmering gold under a morning sun that has no idea it is rising over the edge of history. It is June 28th, 1914, a Sunday, and Sarajevo is waking up. On this particular morning, excitement hums quietly beneath the surface. Flags hang stiff from balconies. Police patrol the streets in tighter patterns, and shopkeepers sweep their thresholds with unusual urgency, because today the Archduke is coming. Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, is visiting the city with his wife, Duchess Sophie. The empire hopes to display control and unity here in Bosnia, place of recent rebellion, of mixed allegiances, and of rising Slavic nationalism. The procession will be grand. A motorcade will glide through the heart of the city. Cheers are expected. Applause, loyalty. But there are others waiting. Others who have waited all night in silence. Young men in their teens and early 20s, dressed in plain clothes, standing along the route with rigid hands buried in coat pockets. Each carries a pistol or a bomb. Each has swallowed the idea that dying today might serve a cause older than their short lives. They belong to a secret nationalist group called the Black Hand, a circle of radicals devoted to Slavic unity. Enraged by Austrian occupation, trained in secret, driven by the belief that one act of violence can change the course of nations. They've come to kill an Archduke. Franz Ferdinand and Sophie arrive by train just before 10 o'clock. He steps onto the platform in his full blue military uniform and white feathered hat, tall and formal. She wears a white dress and a soft smile. They climb into an open-top Gerv and stiffed touring car, leading a motorcade of officials. The route is public, winding through a pelkey alongside the river. Spectators lean from balconies. Police scan the crowd. The Archduke waves. The Duchess leans forward to smile at children. It all seems ordinary, too ordinary. And then the first attack happens. A grenade is thrown from the crowd. The attacker is a man named Nedeljko Vabrinovia, one of the conspirators. The bomb bounces off the folded roof of the Archduke's car and rolls underneath the vehicle behind. The explosion rips through the air, wounding to officers and shattering windows. In an instant, chaos erupts. Screams, smoke, soldiers shouting orders, and the Archduke's driver slams the accelerator, racing away from the scene. Gavrilo tries to kill himself. He swallows a cyanide pill that fails to work and jumps into the river, which turns out to be shallow. He is dragged out by police and beaten by an angry mob, but the attack has failed. The Archduke is alive, and yet the day is not over. The procession regroups. The Archduke insists on continuing with the visit. He wants to show resolve, not weakness. They decide to visit the wounded officers in the hospital, but somewhere between intentions and orders, something goes wrong. The driver is not informed of the route change. And so, the motorcade turns onto Franz Joseph Street accidentally. It is a wrong turn, and fate is waiting at that corner. Standing near a small delicatessen is a 19-year-old student named Gavrilo Princip. He had assumed the plan was over, that the opportunity had passed. But suddenly, the Archduke's car is right in front of him, stopped. The gears grind as the driver attempts to reverse. There is no guard, no interference, just distance barely 5 feet. Gavrilo raises his pistol. He fires twice. The first bullet pierces the Archduke's neck. The second tears through Sophie's abdomen. The Duchess slumps in her seat. Franz leans toward her, clutching her hand. Blood spreads quickly across his uniform. He whispers, "Sophie, Sophie, stay alive for our children." And then he, too, collapses. Within minutes, they are both dead. The car does not move. There is no shouting, no siren, just stunned silence. The kind of silence that falls before a storm breaks. No one knows it, yet not the driver, not the conspirators, not even the emperor in Vienna, but these 2 shots, fired by a teenage boy on a narrow Sarajevo street, will pull the world into darkness. In less than 2 months, empires will declare war. Front lines will stretch across continents. Trenches will split the soil of Europe. Gas will poison air. Steel will fall from the sky. And 20 million souls will vanish. But right now, in this quiet moment, the world is still holding its breath. History has just changed, and it only took 2 bullets. The Archduke lay still in the back seat of the car. Sophie beside him, her white dress soaked through with blood. The heat of the day pressed down on the street, but inside the car, the temperature felt frozen suspended. The driver stared straight ahead, hands trembling on the wheel, as if moving would make the truth more real. People began to gather, slowly at first, not with panic, but with disbelief, as if the horror unfolding before them couldn't possibly be real. Somewhere in the city, Gavrilo Princip was being dragged away by police. His hands were tied behind his back. His shoulders hunched in submission. His face pale not with regret, but with shock. The plan was never supposed to unfold like this. They were supposed to fail. He was supposed to die, to become a name lost in silence, not the center of the world's gaze. But now, here he was 19 years old and unknowingly responsible for what would become the deadliest chain reaction in modern history. Because what he did was not just murder. It was a match to a century's worth of kindling. To understand why, we must look far beyond that Sarajevo street. Europe in 1914 was not a place of peace. It was a place of fear wrapped in elegance, tension hidden behind treaties, suspicion cloaked in diplomacy. The continent was carved up by empires, each straining at the edges. Austro-Hungarians ruled a web of nationalities barely stitched together. Russians eyed the Balkans as their natural sphere. The Germans, young and industrially aggressive, watched everyone. Britain guarded its navy like a crown. France still burned with revenge over lost provinces from a war 40 years past. And beneath all of it, nationalism grew like mold in a sealed room. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand was not the first act of violence in the Balkans. It was simply the first that reached the heart of empire. Austria-Hungary saw an opportunity not just to avenge a murder, but to crush Serbian nationalism once and for all. Within weeks, they drafted a list of demands, harsh, humiliating, designed to be refused. Serbia accepted most of them, but not all. And that was enough. On July 28th, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. One declaration, one spark, and the rest came tumbling down. Russia, bound by Slavic kinship and strategic interests, mobilized to defend Serbia. Germany, Austria's loyal ally, declared war on Russia. France, tied to Russia, declared war on Germany. Germany invaded Belgium to strike France from the north. Britain, sworn to defend Belgium, entered the war. Within a week, every major power in Europe was at war, and Gavrilo, Princip chained, malnourished, already coughing blood in a prison cell, had no idea. The armies moved with speed and confidence. War was still seen as glorious then. Crowds cheered at train stations. Women waved handkerchiefs. Young men smiled from windows, promising to write. They believed it would be over by Christmas. They brought paper and pens. Some brought soccer balls. They didn't yet understand what industrial war would do to the human body. They didn't yet know that machine guns didn't just shoot, they erased. The Germans advanced through Belgium with mechanical precision. The French raced to defend their homeland. The British crossed the Channel, slower but determined. And the Russians surged into East Prussia with overwhelming numbers but little coordination. Within weeks, the world became fire, and then the front lines froze. The Western Front stretched like a scar across France and Belgium. Soldiers dug trenches deep into the earth, living among rats and mud, unable to advance. For miles, nothing but wire, water, and waiting. Men slept in puddles, wrote letters by candlelight, watched the stars from a hole in the ground. And when the whistles blew, they went over the top to the void. Barbed wire tore at legs. Machine guns spat lead in sheets. Mortar rained from invisible skies. And sometimes gas came floating low and green, seeping into lungs like poisoned breath. Death became routine. Survival became lottery. And still, they called it duty. The Eastern Front was no less brutal. Russia bled men by the hundreds of thousands. Its officers untrained, its logistics shattered. The Austrians crumbled under the weight of fighting a war on too many sides. The Germans, hardened and organized, held their lines with brutal efficiency. And through it all, the Black Hand vanished. Its members were hunted, imprisoned, some executed. Gavrilo Princip, too young to be hanged, was sentenced to 20 years. His health failed quickly. The cold stone of his prison ate at his lungs. He was forgotten by the world he had changed. He died in 1918, just months before the war ended. A broken body, a skeleton. He never knew the size of the storm he helped unleash, but the war didn't end with him. The Ottoman Empire joined the conflict. The Middle East became another front. In Africa, colonies clashed. In Asia, Japan seized the chance to expand. The war spread not by intent, but by momentum. It became a machine, and no one could find the break. By 1916, hope had dulled. Redun, the some names that meant nothing before, now meant everything. At Redun, over 300,000 died for a few kilometers of mud. At the Somme, the British lost 60,000 in a single day. And for what? 4 lines that barely moved. 4 officers who still believed in charges. 4 ideas older than the guns they used. In the cities, breadlines grew. In the countryside, letters stopped coming. Men returned without limbs. Some didn't return at all. And those who did no longer spoke about the front. Not because they couldn't, but because no one would understand. And yet, the world kept turning. Alliances formed. Submarines prowled the Atlantic, sinking ships without warning. The Lusitania, a British passenger liner, was struck and sunk. Hundreds died, among them Americans. And soon, even the ocean would no longer separate war from peace. By 1917, the war had consumed everything: land, lives, hope, and the illusion that any one side could emerge untouched filled. The one that had existed before Sarajevo had long since collapsed into the mud and wire of the trenches. And yet, even in ruin, the powers kept fighting. Because to stop, to retreat, to admit the horror they believed was to dishonor the dead. In Russia, the people had reached their limit. After 3 brutal years of war, food had vanished, cities starved, soldiers mutinied. The Russian Revolution exploded like a second front of history itself. First, the Tsar was overthrown. Then, the Bolsheviks rose to power, promising bread, land, and peace. And in 1918, they signed a treaty with Germany, exiting the war, giving up vast territory, and pulling an empire out of the fight. The Allies had lost a major partner, but another was rising. Across the Atlantic, America had watched and waited. President Woodrow Wilson kept the country neutral at first, but neutrality frayed with every ship that sank, every citizen killed by German U-boats. And when the Zimmermann telegram was discovered, a secret message proposing a German alliance with Mexico against the United States, public opinion snapped. In April 1917, America entered the war, not for land, not for empire, but for an idea: to make the world safe for democracy. Fresh troops arrived, fresh supplies, a new energy. And as the German military staggered under the weight of prolonged war, the tide finally turned. By mid-1918, Germany knew it could not win. The home front was collapsing. Workers struck. Soldiers deserted. Allies fell away. Bulgaria surrendered. The Ottoman Empire crumbled. Austria-Hungary began to dissolve. In Berlin, revolution whispered. And then came the day, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. November 11th, 1918, armistice. Across Europe, the guns stopped. The silence was deafening. Soldiers stood in trenches, blinking in disbelief. Some wept, some laughed, simply sat down and stared at nothing, as if trying to remember what it meant to feel something other than fear. In Paris, London, and New York, bells rang, crowds cheered. It was mixed with mourning, because no one had really won. The numbers told the story: nearly 20 million dead, another 20 million wounded, towns wiped off the map, families shattered, landscapes scarred with shell holes and bones, and the survivors carried ghosts in their eyes for the rest of their lives. Europe, once the shining engine of civilization, now lay in ashes. The old empires, those ancient giants, had crumbled. Austria-Hungary was gone. broken into a dozen uncertain nations. The Ottoman Empire, once the gateway between East and West, was reduced to borders drawn in secret by foreign powers. Russia was now a new kind of beast, red with revolution, in Germany, defeated, humiliated, and hungry. In 1919, the victors met at Versailles to decide what came next. But instead of healing, they chose punishment. Germany was forced to accept full responsibility for the war. The war guilt clause, they called it. They had to pay reparations, billions, hand over their colonies, reduce their army to a fraction of its former self, and watch as foreign troops occupied their borders. Pride was replaced with shame, national identity with humiliation, and in that bitterness, seeds were sown. Seeds that would grow in the shadows over the next 2 decades, watered by resentment, tended by men who remembered how the world had mocked them. Men who would one day wear brown shirts and swastikas, but that storm still slept. For now, in the cell where he spent his last days, Gavrilo Princip faded into death. His tuberculosis consumed him. His body wasted away to just over 80 pounds. He died in April 1918, months before the war he sparked would finally end. He was 23. He did not see the treaty. He never saw the empire's fall. He didn't witness the starvation, the poison gas, the millions buried in trenches that became rivers when it rained. He had believed in liberation, in unity, in sacrifice. But what he gave the world was none of those things. What he gave was a mirror, a glimpse into what happens when small men carry enormous ideas into rooms made of gasoline and strike a match. Today, we remember the names: Verdun, the Somme, Ypres, Gallipoli. We visit the graves. We read the letters. We stand in the quiet fields and try to imagine what it was like, but we will never really know. Not unless we remember not just what happened, but why. It did not begin with a bomb or a bullet. It began with pride, with fear, with fragile egos and trembling alliances, with men who believed peace was weakness, and that violence could solve what compromise could not. World War I did not end war. It ended in age, and in its ashes, a darker future waited. And now, the world sleeps beneath flags stitched from that century of fire. Sarajevo is quiet again. The street corner still stands. The river still flows. But the silence knows. It remembers the moment one man, one decision unraveled an age. History does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers through cracks in the pavement, through worn memorial stones, through the eyes of those who still ask, how did it begin? The answer lies not in the war itself, but in the quiet before it. In the shot, no one expected. The boy, no one noticed. And the world that never saw it coming